In this lesson, we will extend our use of exponential smoothing to include seasonality patterns. Now remember that seasonality is a repeated cycle around a known and fixed period. This means while it can be annual and we think of the 4 seasons, it can also be tied to monthly patterns, weekly patterns, daily patterns, day of the week, anything in between, anything again that is repeated and around a known and fixed period of time. Now, in practice, most things have some kind of annual seasonality, especially for products that are consumer packaged goods or CPG products that some consumer uses at the very end. So let's just go through some examples because this is fun. So I have the 12 months of the year up here at the top, and the winter months for the northern hemisphere anyway are in gray, and then the spring is in green, the summer months are in yellow, and brown is in the fall months. So let's talk about a couple products. Chocolate and candy. Where is their peak seasonality? In fact, there's a 2-week period in the United States where 10% of all candy is sold. And if you're from the United States, you know this. It's Halloween. It's at the end of November. And so it's a huge spike in demand. And now there's also some around in Easter and Valentine's Day, but it is an order of magnitude smaller than the amount of candy that is sold at the end of October in the last 2 weeks here. So why do we care about seasonality? Well, we care about it because to produce 10% of all your product over the course of a year in just 2 weeks, you've got to start preparing way in advance and start stockpiling. You've got to try to figure out how to make that product ahead of time and figure out where you're going to keep it and how you're going to make sure it's available when that peak demand comes. Now, I also have this other period because Chinese New Year. When I talk about this example in class, all the students from China say, well, wait a minute, Chinese New Year is a huge bump for candy, and that's also true. So this illustrates another point that seasonality isn't always the same in different parts of the world. You'll look at northern hemisphere, southern hemisphere, but also each country might have different types of seasonality. Because remember, this can be either driven by nature or by man-made events. So Halloween, it has nothing to do with nature. That's a man-made event, but it is driving the seasonality of chocolate and candy. All right, let's do another example. Salads, whether they're pre-packaged or actually consumed like it's shown here in the little picture in a salad bar. So where do you think the peak for that is? Well, what's interesting, talking to some of the manufacturers of packaged salad goods, it's really at these 2 time periods, at the end of November, early December, and in early January. Why? Because you've got big holidays in the U.S. Christmas at the end of December and Thanksgiving at the end of November. So people eat so much that they want to be healthy, so there's a peak in salad right after that because people try to start losing weight again. Interesting what drives these different seasonalities. Okay, another one. Garden tools. These are lawnmowers, wheelbarrows, anything you need for your lawn or any kind of outdoor repair. So this kind of would be naturally where you think. In the northern hemisphere, we'd have things in the spring. And so you have this big peak kind of in the April-May timeframe getting ready for the summer months. And in the southern hemisphere, you have just the opposite, of course. This is when their spring is, ready for their summer months. So you see that it's the same pattern, but because the winter and summers are flipped for the hemispheres, they'll offset each other. Last one. Cloth bandages. When someone from a company told me about this, I didn't believe it. So there is seasonality to cloth bandages. And in the U.S., the peak time, 4th of July. Why is 4th of July? Because that's one of the major times that people use fireworks. And so there's a lot of hand injuries and people hurting themselves by doing fireworks in their backyard. It's a huge seasonality for cloth bandages. And again, the Chinese students in my class say, wait a minute. The Chinese New Year, that's also a big peak as well. And so, again, this is not because of nature. This is a man-made event. So the point of this is, it's interesting always to see what the seasonality is for different products. And you should always be aware that there usually is some kind of seasonality. It's rare that you have an item that is steady state across the year or across a month. In fact, for a lot of times, you see seasonality driven by sales, and you've got this sawtooth diagram where you have big sales right at the end of a financial quarter because sales guys are trying to make their quotas. And that's a kind of an artificial seasonality But still, it's something present and you might want to try and get rid of it, but it's something we as supply chain professionals have to deal with. All right, what are we going to talk about in the rest of this video? Well, we're only going to talk about a couple things, but it'll take a little while. We'll start talking about seasonality and how we include that in exponential smoothing. We'll introduce a double exponential smoothing model that takes care of level and seasonality. Then we'll introduce the Holt-Winter model that takes care of all three of the trends, of the patterns rather, that we've been looking at: level, trend, and seasonality. Then we'll talk about initialization of parameters, something we've been ignoring over the last two videos and lectures. And then we'll finish up with some practical concerns just about exponential smoothing and forecasting in general. All right, let's get started.